2023 has been one of the best years for new games in recent memory, and I've just been so busy, man. I haven't played like so many cool games this year that I wanted to. In September of this year, I got married. And if you've never gotten married before, it's great. But planning a wedding, on the other hand, is, well, time-consuming, to put it nicely. Of course, it was all worth it, and I had an absolutely amazing day, but as such, I have played like none of the games that most people are going to be debating over which is Game of the Year in the last few months of this year. But in a way, having to be a little more choosy about what games I did spend my time with this year made me more grateful for how many awesome experiences I still had this year. Game of the Year is a difficult concept for me to wrap my head around anyways, given that I play a lot of indie games or games that are at least a few years old. Oftentimes, the games that define my year aren't usually what most people would call Game of the Year material. But this year, even more so, the games that I've enjoyed the most generally trended on the smaller and lower profile side of things. Now, the last time I did one of these was July, and more time than not over the months since then have been devoted to real-life obligations. But here's a video for the stuff that I found the time to enjoy in the moments in between. Leading up to the release of Armored Core 6: The Fires of Rubicon, I had heard the opinion from many people that it looks cool, but mech games just aren't for me. A statement that I mostly would have agreed with, but I honestly got to thinking, why? Why do I and so many people feel this way? Why are there so many people who aren't interested in something as nearly objectively cool as giant robots with huge guns who beat the crap out of each other? At least in my mind, the reason was simple. Mech games have always been this kind of obscure and niche thing that a handful of people absolutely love, but that to most people was a known quantity that they just didn't mesh with. And that is completely fair. I had this picture in my mind of mechs being these slow, awkward things, and that is just not the style of gameplay that I ultimately seek out most of the time. Hell, I love Titanfall 2, but I have to concede it was mainly for the awesome and fluid pilot controls and not the much slower and sometimes clunkier Titan controls. And beyond that, I can hardly name a mech game that I've had even a remote interest in. Until, of course, Armored Core 6 was announced. And boy, oh boy, am I glad I took a chance on this game, because it is absolutely phenomenal. And it might even be my game of the year. I, like most people, took the plunge on this game despite not being very familiar with the Armored Core series and not having the strongest interest in mechs, solely due to my trust in From Software. And I was not let down. Despite this, as I understand it, being an Armored Core game through and through and not Dark Souls with a fresh coat of rusty metal paint, it took me no less than 5 minutes to feel that this was a FromSoft game. I played the game on a controller, but the game booted up with keyboard button prompts. I eventually found the setting to change this, but not until after I had kind of fumbled through the tutorial by kind of just guessing what each button did. But I missed a pretty important prompt, which was for the quick thrust. So when I was faced with this helicopter thing, the tutorial boss, the asylum demon of this game, if you will, I immediately felt like something was missing as I died over and over again. So I experimented a little bit and I found the quick thrust function. And next thing you know, I had bullets whizzing past my mech, rockets exploding behind me as I charged towards the helicopter to smack it with my energy sword. And 5 minutes in, I knew I was hooked. And trust me, folks, it only gets better from here. I won't visually spoil anything beyond the first chapter, but just, like...
Bacteus. You'll have to break its pulse ion to inflict meaningful damage. That's the dose of coral nearly killed you. Please, you have to focus on winning this. The waves are intensifying. Raven, get clear.
I had these moments all throughout the game's first chapter where I was like, wow, I did not expect that. And they just kept coming and coming until it culminated in the chapter's end boss, Balteus. Some games wish they had final bosses as cool as this, let alone basically the first major boss. I had worried that the mission-based structure of Armored Core 6 would remove the moments of genuine surprise and discovery that I had while playing games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring. But I was surprised at every turn what the game had in store for me. Yeah, all of your missions are basically go here and shoot that, but All along the way, there are basically endless twists. Sometimes your enemies are invisible. Sometimes they're fucking giant. Sometimes you're fighting them while lasers rain from the sky. And sometimes a simple mission falls apart when you almost die in an explosion and a boss with 9,000 rockets spewing out a flaming sword comes out and stunlocks you for 2 hours while an unfamiliar voice comes over your comms telling you that everything's going to be alright, and rain pours down on crumbling megastructures and dark synths pound in the background, and all you can say is just, wow. They fucking did it again. Without any words spoken between you and the boss, the emotional weight of this fight speaks for itself in a way that I firmly believe that only From Software is capable of. And trust me, folks, it still only gets better from here. If my analytics on this channel are anything to go by, the overlap in people who enjoy my usual retro FPS fare and, well, FromSoft's traditionally sword and board Souls titles is basically non-existent. But even if you're a FromSoft naysayer, I have to say I think a lot of people who like the type of shooters I normally cover on this channel will find something to love in Armored Core. And I just don't want people who might honestly love this game as much as I do missing out on a phenomenal game just because of a preconceived notion about its developer. So please check it out. One of my greatest game discoveries since I began streaming was Blasphemous. Last fall, I was looking for something to play between longer games, and Blasphemous 1 felt like a good fit for a few streams. After my second play session where I climbed this mountain area, got blown by the wind into insta-kill spikes over and over again, and then my reward was fighting this absolute shit show of a boss, I honestly debated if I even wanted to keep playing this game or not. But I'm glad I did, because the result was that Blasphemous's second half, full of amazing areas, incredible bosses, and the combat really clicking together to become quite fun, fluid, and expressive, had me leaving this game considering it to be one of, if not my absolute favorite Metroidvania of all time. So when Blasphemous 2 was officially announced shortly after that, I knew I would have to give it a go. And right off the bat, I absolutely adored this game as well. And I think it might honestly be even better than the first and have taken up the mantle of being my new favorite Metroidvania. I've seen this opinion of the first game that it actually isn't a Metroidvania, and while I feel like it shares enough in common with other games that would pretty unanimously be labeled Metroidvanias that it's kind of a moot point, I could kind of understand the viewpoint. In the first Blasphemous, you had combat abilities that were useful basically only in combat, and traversal upgrades that were useful basically only in traversal. There was never really any overlap, and some genre purists believe these are things that need to overlap for a game to be considered a Metroidvania. If that's the case, then Blasphemous 2 took things in the complete opposite direction, where your traversal abilities are 100% useful in combat. But not only that, you collect 3 different weapons which can all be comboed together, and they all have unique interactions for traversal as well. They get comboed into these really unique and fun platforming puzzles. But even more than that, while you could probably beat this game by just picking one weapon you like best and sticking to it like glue, the game really shines when you embrace hot swapping between these weapons situationally, or even sometimes in the heat of combat. Each one shines in specific situations, and you'll honestly find that sometimes you want one for one enemy or situation and something else for another. I honestly love it so much. It really took what was already surprisingly complex and expressive combat from the first game and basically multiplied your options by 3. I honestly fully expected to love Blasphemous 2 as a follow-up to Blasphemous 1, but what I didn't expect was just how surprised I would be by its inventiveness and willingness to try new things despite retaining a familiar feel and formula to the first one. This is how you do a proper indie sequel, folks. And while my experience and tastes in Metroidvanias is a little bit limited and honestly kind of unorthodox, I do have a lot of respect for the genre, and I don't say lightly that this game might genuinely be my new favorite Metroidvania, and a true and worthy contender for my Game of the Year already. And Game Kitchen have a reputation from Blasphemous 1 of taking a great game and making it even better over time, so I'm excited to see where this game ends up as well. It is the year of the sequels. For me at least. And adding to the list of 2s that I love this year, Ghostrunner 2 is absolutely fantastic. I played the original Ghostrunner on stream well over a year ago, had a video in the works on it, pushed it off, and just eventually never made it. It had nothing to do with me not liking the game. In fact, I loved it. But Ghostrunner just felt like a very natural match for my channel, and I think a lot of people were surprised that I never covered it. So here goes, I guess. I love Ghostrunner 2. And in a year full of amazing games, both long and short, the roughly 10 hours I spent with Ghostrunner 2 was some of the most fun I had in any game all year. If you're familiar with the first Ghostrunner, much like Blasphemous 2 was to the first Blasphemous, Ghostrunner 2 takes the general vibe and formula of the first game, drops some of the annoying stuff, improves a little bit on almost everything, and adds some very cool stuff on top of it. The game is just really good. What can I say? To highlight what I love most about Ghostrunner 2, I've often thought of the first Ghostrunner as a puzzle game. I know that sounds a bit weird, but hear me out. Despite the game being focused on platforming and combat, the way forward was often about finding the right path and flow of combat and abilities to get through sections and arenas. And finally, cracking through and finding the right combo often gave me the same feeling as solving a puzzle. That isn't to say that the game isn't fast, reflex-based, and often very challenging. It also wasn't completely free of any room for expression. But Ghostrunner 2 feels like it has really kind of cut the player free in a way, giving you more abilities with less downtime and more interactions enabled by those abilities, like grappling to stunned enemies, launching explosive barrels at enemies, and things like that. There's still a ton of satisfaction to solving these encounters, but it just feels like you have more options. And the game really excels at making you feel cool as hell in a way that the first game didn't always perfectly hit the mark on. For these reasons as well, Ghostrunner 2 could probably be considered to be a bit easier than the first game, but I think only really if your measure of difficulty is just dying a lot. The game is still challenging. A number of times I had to stop to think about the best approach for a room, and even sometimes had to get pretty damn creative with it. And I often would find myself using all my abilities to clutch a victory from the jaws of defeat. But I love that you could just do that. A lot of things I tried in this game would have just led to death in the first game, and I'm overall incredibly happy with how this expanded toolset compounded into a really fun and satisfying escalation from the first game. Gone are those frustrating and tedious cyberspace sections, or at least improved beyond recognition. Vastly improved are the bosses to the point where they feel like real combat instead of just a puzzle with an arbitrary health bar. And I don't know how popular of an opinion this is, but I even kind of like the open world motorbike sections. Ghostrunner 2 is just a proper sequel in every way you'd like to see a sequel be done, and I think it's fucking great. Check it out, or at least put it on your list to check out next year or something. It is definitely worth your time. Oh, and look out for a dedicated video on the game coming to the channel soon. I have this thought in my mind for no real apparent reason whatsoever that my game of the year has to be some single player game that had some sort of profound impact on me or something like that. But hardly, if at all, have I been surprised by a game this year more than Battlebit Remastered, to the point where I'm left wondering, why couldn't my game of the year be a goofy ass early access Battlefield clone that kind of looks like Roblox? No, seriously, why not? Okay. Battlebit is probably not actually my game of the year, but it would be a stretch to say that any new game other than this has had a more profoundly positive impact on my year than Battlebit, which brought me many nights of pure hilarity and fun with my friends, the likes of which we have not had altogether in quite a while. I grew up with some of my first favorite FPS games being the likes of Battlefield 2, Bad Company 2, and Battlefield 3. So the absolute incompetency with which the Battlefield franchise has been handled by EA and DICE since then has left a, well, Battlefield-sized hole in my heart. What's awesome about Battlebit is the openness with which a game that honestly kinda looks like crap was accepted by a community that is largely used to next-gen, cutting-edge realism. Not to mention that this wildly successful take on a genre that has previously had few competitors was made by a tiny indie team. Indie games have a ton of trouble breaking into the popular multiplayer shooter zeitgeist, to the point where devs are mostly, smartly might I add, foregoing any development time to multiplayer components because it just is not worth it usually. But Battlebit has absolutely flipped the script here and maybe even opened doors for other devs, and you'll love to see it. Speaking of games made by tiny teams that punch way above their weight class, Lunacid was a game that released in early access back around when I made a video called Retro Games Are the Future. Now, the point of that video was to suggest that AAA development was kind of falling out of favor and that indie devs were harnessing retro and stylized art styles to honestly make pretty damn big and impressive games, and then go on to sell them at lower prices, make them more accessible on lower end hardware, and so on and so forth. Now, 2023 has set out to prove me wrong with some really phenomenal massive AAA releases. But the point of this video, I think, in many ways still rings true to this day, and Lunacid was central to my argument. When I first played Lunacid, I was blown away by how, even in early access, the game felt massive, deep, and like it was hiding all sorts of secrets. And I just found it unfathomable that all of that had been made by essentially one person. But upon returning to it after its 1.0 release this month, what struck me the most about Lunacid, despite all of that, was this permeable and endearing indiness about it. I think it's easy to get swept away by the amazing things indie devs are capable of these days and actually forget why we love indie games in the first place. But honestly, Lunacid has done an admirable job of reminding me of it. It's just a game that oozes personality and uniqueness in a way that absolutely only an indie game can. There's also sort of a charming cacophony of visual design here. It's not to say it's bad, but there's something inherently hilarious about a cute anime demon girl helping you out throughout this otherwise bleak and grounded world. We're delving into the deepest, darkest tomb, only to stumble on a CRT TV with a VCR player. Yeah. But despite this, Lunacid feels distinctly itself. It never takes itself too seriously and still has an unwavering and totally unique artistic vision despite that. Discussion about this game is generally focused on its similarity and self-admitted inspiration from Software's Kingsfield games. But despite significant gameplay similarities, it's hard not to see Lunacid as wholly its own thing at this point. I haven't worked my way through all the game's new content yet, but I have absolutely no qualms about saying that I totally adore this game, and it has every right to be mentioned alongside some of my other favorite games of the year. All right, so Teardown is not a new game, but I played a ton of this game on stream throughout 2022. I never really got around to finishing it, however, and I just had a craving to pick it back up again recently. And I was reminded just how unbelievably fun and awesome this game is. Teardown didn't really work its way into my Game of the Year consideration for 2022. I honestly forgot it released out of early access last year because really at no point since it first released did it ever feel anything short of an absolute marvel of a game. Now, as time has gone on, the game has been fleshed out with content, and there's even more of it on the way apparently. This game honestly never felt anything short of effortless. It's a weird way to describe it, but the game just works so well with its many complex and simulated systems that it's easy to forget just how insane it is to even have a game where every single voxel is deeply simulated to an almost ridiculous degree, let alone for every single level to not only be these insane sandboxes, but also be filled with endlessly interesting and unique open-ended puzzles that just keep defying expectations. I have no real catalyst or motivation for bringing this game up other than that I am just reminded how great it is every single time I boot it up. And I have yet to sing the praises of it on this channel, so here it goes. I love Teardown. Now, I would be remiss to not talk about Turbo Overkill at least one more time this year. So here it goes. I love Turbo Overkill, and if I haven't said it already, I'm going to say it again. Out of every game I've talked about here so far, Turbo Overkill is by far the game that I've already talked about on this channel the most. But my channel has changed a whole lot since the last time I covered this game. I was busy planning a freaking wedding when it came out in 1.0, and I just haven't gotten around to making another video on it. But it is absolutely the best new FPS game I've played this year, in a year where I've played a lot of amazing new FPS games. And it still isn't even remotely close. It's that good. Now, I did say at least one more time this year. I do have a video in the works that would be an absolutely exhaustive deep dive into Turbo Overkill, and I'm honestly really excited to talk more about this awesome game and in more depth. I'm just not confident I'll get it out before the end of this year. So if this is indeed the last time I mentioned Turbo Overkill before we roll credits on 2023, then just know that I fucking love this game, and it's not just a good boomer shooter. It's not just a good indie game. It is just a fantastic game, period, and deserves genuine Game of the Year attention, full stop. 2023 has been a year of transition for me, and honestly, for better or worse, that has reflected on the channel as well. Namely, the views are down, videos have been fewer and farther between because I've just been really busy, and I probably won't hit almost any of my growth goals for the year. It hasn't completely demoralized me from YouTube and content creation in general, but it has made me acutely aware that success is far from guaranteed. And even in the absolute best circumstance outcome, I simply won't be able to do this forever. But content creation and streaming has definitely made me realize one thing. I absolutely love creating things. And I am still totally fascinated by game design and the minutia of what makes games work and so on. So, well, you might be able to see where this is going. I'm making a game. Well, sort of. It's early days and it's tough to say if it will go anywhere or amount to anything, but I've been spending a not insignificant amount of my free time learning 3D development in Godot. I started out making a character controller and some scenes for an FPS game that was a bit outside of my capabilities at the moment. Now, I hope to come back to it eventually once I've learned a little more, but in the meantime, I've started work on a bit of a small, abstract walking simulator / dungeon crawler type game. And I don't know when I'll have more to share on this, but I find that sharing details about this stuff publicly helps me feel motivated about sticking with it. So here's hoping. So far, I'm really enjoying sinking my teeth into game development. I know it isn't exactly what this channel is about, but I hope to find ways to talk about it more in the future. And in light of that, I have one more thing that I want to talk about. In 2022, I left my full-time job. Now, I've talked about it before, but the reason wasn't to pursue content creation. But I did for a while, and it went better than expected. Not so successful that I was making back my old full-time salary, not even really all that close, but enough that I stuck with it for longer than I expected. And I absolutely couldn't have done any of this without my amazing wife, who is so absurdly supportive and positive about what I'm doing in ways that I'm not even capable of myself. We actually got legally married back in 2022, but our wedding was in September of this year, and if nothing else, it reminded me how absurdly lucky I am to be married to her. Even though she doesn't really appear on this channel very often, if you are at all a fan of this channel, a lot of what I've built here can be indirectly attributed to her and her support. So, yeah, I mean, there's probably a joke in here somewhere, but with 100% sincerity, I love my wife. With the wedding behind us and life getting back to normal, I'm looking forward to picking up speed on YouTube stuff again. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that I can't wait to show you, but I did want to take a moment to acknowledge a person who actually has a massive impact on what I do here that doesn't get talked about enough, especially since this year has really felt like a celebration of our life together. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.
Hit that like
This is
button.
alright.
Smash that bell, hit that
Hit
bell
this-
button, hit this
Destroy my
bell
pussy.
button.
Subscribe to Dumper Man.